I'm Josh, and the claim that I'll be refuting is that playing violent video games negatively affects behavioral patterns. The first claim that my opponent had was that violent video games encourage aggressiveness. Second was violence through video games triggers hostile personalities. Third was violent video games reduce emotional response to real-life violence. Okay. No, the first claim was that violence video games encourages aggressiveness. The evidence that she used was that statistics states that violence video games lead to increasing that these things, playing the video games, leads actually to antisocial interactions, bullying, fighting, and criminal behavior. While violent video games may increase aggressiveness, it would only be doing it in the same way that a sport would, where once you're playing the game, or the action of actually doing it, after you're done, it's gone. There's no hostility afterwards. If there is, it's just residual that eventually goes away, and it's not going to last very long. My opponent states, uses sources saying that video games cause violent behavior in everyday life, yet there have been several more major studies by groups such as Harvard Medical School Center of Mental Health, the Journal of Adolescent Health, and the British Medical Journal that all show that there is no conclusive link between video games and violence in violent activity. And the second claim was violence through video games triggers hostile personalities. Studies done, my opponent says that there's studies done by American Psychology Society saying that the average person is exposed to violent video games at least 53 minutes per day. This causes fascination with brutality and bloodshed to be incorporated into daily life. A person exposed to the game longer has an increased attraction to the concept of violence. 53 minutes isn't that long. In studies done by consumersaffairs.com says that among all kids, gamers, approximately half are light users, which play at least 5 hours a week, and that the rest are half to medium, or the other half is medium, heavy, or super users, which play 6 to 16 more hours per week. Yet even though people are exposed to violent video games so much daily, we still don't see any uprise in brutality and bloodshed in our daily lives from people playing these games. Even though, according to opponent studies, the people who play these games will start crave the violence even more in their daily lives. In fact, the studies done by Rena Goldberg from WholeFamily.com, there has actually been a decrease in violence in schools and in the age group of these kids. Now, the third claim my opponent used was violence video games reduces emotional reactions to real life like violence, and she uses an example of somebody being held up in an alley with a gun, and that somebody walking by wouldn't do anything because they wouldn't want to get hurt. But in reality, anybody who walks by would second guess doing anything as a response because they would be afraid of being hurt, not because they would be afraid of, not because of video games, but because plain and simply nobody wants to get shot or killed or anything like that. So that's just a normal human instinct. And that's it.
All right, the labeling on the secondary claims and the main claim was really clear. On the first point, you highlight the advocate's evidence, but I didn't think your response was as clear as it should be. You've got a good declaration, but no evidence on that particular point. What finally does come up is the citation of 3 or 4 studies that you just kind of give us the highlights of that suggest that there's no conclusive link there. You're letting the evidence make the claim then instead of making the claim and then using the evidence to support that point. So you ultimately have a good answer there, but it's being presented in kind of a passive way, and you want to be more assertive. The signpost moving to the next point is also clear. You minimize the amount of time. I thought you had some good evidence on that. At first I was a little concerned because you made a claim. This time you made the claim first that there's a lack of uprising brutality, and it sounded like you were just going to assert that. You don't really have any evidence that supports that point, but the follow-up evidence that says actually violence in schools has decreased, at least that does have some application to that point, so I thought you did a pretty good job on that. On the third point, you challenged the reasonableness of the hypothetical and suggest that there might be other causality there that has nothing to do with observing video games. I think that's a reasonable challenge. The advocate didn't have any evidence on that particular point except the hypothetical. Your conclusion just seemed a little bit abrupt. It seemed like you ran out of stuff to say without figuring out what the point was that you were trying to make there. All right. Thank you.